My whole life I dedicated myself to fight against the monsters who threatened the Imperium of Man. But one day I looked at myself in the mirror just before my toothbrush got dissolved by my acid saliva and I thought, what if I was the real monster all along? Silly obligatory opening jokes aside, with the Space Marine game number 2 set up to finally be released this year, now is a good time to finally discuss the Space Marines in depth, and not psych you guys out and talk about how Halo is a pretty cool guy because he kills aliens and doesn't afraid of anything, just like I did in my last video on the topic. I already discussed the reason why humanity would need Space Marines as a force, especially in a setting like 40k, where there's plenty of inhuman forces we'd need to compete against. I recommend that video, but you don't need to watch it for this one to make sense, so feel free to stay. When it comes to Warhammer 40k Space Marines specifically, a key aspect of their existence is their apparent contradiction, which is occasionally brought up by the fanbase. I mean, the Imperium of Man had a humanist philosophical doctrine, which then evolved into a religion precisely to justify blowing up whatever isn't human, including mutants. But then they rely on what looks like artificially created state-backed post-human mutants? Heck, the Astartes might even be a subspecies that left their humanity behind. And if this were the case, it would only be another example of the crippling hypocrisy at the Imperium's core. I mean, there's a reason why some call the Emperor of Mankind the arch-hypocrite. Religious people are evil because they monopolize truth and do crusades. It's different when we do it though. However, when it comes to the Space Marines, I don't think it's hypocrisy. I actually think the nature of the Space Marines for what they are is misunderstood. They're not post-human or a defiance to what it means to be human. They are the human form taken to greater heights. If anything, they're a glorification of what it means to be human. The Space Marines, and as a matter of fact the Custodes, are a quintessential example of how the values and doctrines of a society determine the path a civilization takes and where it invests its resources. An egalitarian society wouldn't choose to invest a solar system's worth of wealth into a handful of towering demigods dripped in gold armor. But a cosmic medieval society definitely would, because the Astartes and Custodes are basically knights and paladins in space! And if you think about it, the idea behind Warhammer is that no matter how much we technologically advance, human nature will always yearn to live in a medieval-esque society. Or at least in a mythological version of it. And what's insane is that Warhammer itself kind of proves this by making video games. Because the first thing we did after developing sophisticated computational technology capable of creating digital simulated worlds was to use it to make simulations of medieval-inspired worlds to inhabit, like Warhammer 40k, or fantasy. Or, like Raid Shadow Legends, this video's sponsor, and a great example of the universality of medieval themes and human psychology. The 700 plus unique champions to play with are an opportunity to live out your Jungian archetype, hero, king, wizard, or waifu. And there's 15 factions to choose from. But peace was never an option, as you fight through 12 dungeons to defeat the bosses, and the player versus player mechanics will give you great honor! New updates arrive regularly, so you must adapt, and you can do so through endless customization features. The game runs on your desktop or mobile, with over 400 million players in over 190 countries. And for new players, you can get your hands on Stag Knight, one of the best epic champions around, as well as a skin for Stag Knight designed by JonTron himself. Just use the promo code JTSkin before October 7th. It's as easy as that. Don't worry if you're not a new player. You can still get Stag Knight and the skin through an in-game event. And if you have a special love for Eastern mythology, then check out Sun Wukong, Raid's take on the mischievous Monkey King, coming as yet another free legendary champion. All you've got to do is log into Raid on 7 different days between August 22nd and October 23rd to get your hands on this awesome champion. When you use my link down in the description or scan my QR code to get something special. The new champion Talia and an epic champion on the side. You know what they say, born too late to explore the oceans, born too early to explore the stars, but born just in time to explore a fantastic mythologized simulation of a medieval world on a smartphone with more computational power than astronauts in the 60s. And no joke, the lore in Raid Shadow Legends is top tier. I actually play it for the story, not gonna lie, and it looks too good to be downloadable for free. Now back to the video. What is the key philosophy driving the Imperium? Well, it's that the Imperium itself must guide and nurture the ascension of man, not only as the dominant species of the galaxy, but as a species itself. To achieve this goal, it would be necessary to increase the power of the human form,
but remain loyal to the human form, because you wouldn't ascend humanity to new heights if you lost it along the way. Looking at you, Cult Mechanicus. The humanist doctrine and later religion of the Imperium had a clear vision of the absolute apex of humanity in the founder of the Imperium himself. Even in its atheist form before the rise of the Imperial cult, after the Emperor went into a 10,000-year-old coma, the Imperium already basically worshipped the Emperor as the ideal all of humanity should follow, obey, and to walk the path he laid out. The Emperor's insistence that he was just a man, perhaps an extremely powerful immortal wizard of a man, but still a man, basically cemented him as the Platonic ideal of humanity and the center of the humanist philosophy of the imperial truth, which is why it was basically already worship if he was the center of political and ideological authority, and his will was the absolute law that humanity was being shaped to emulate. It's different for the Adeptus Mechanicus, where they worship a machine god, so the way to ascend is to aspire to the purity of the blessed machine. They are in fact trying not to be human. They are transhuman, in transition into something other than human as a means to escape the limits of their disgusting mortal coil, for the machine is immortal, don't you know, until it decays from overexposure to the elements or radiation, and even their extensive technological know-how can't preserve its integrity forever, so the tech beasts are just being silly and willfully ignorant by that point. Turns out, worship naturally leads to imitation and emulation of the object of worship. And the Imperium's religion believes that God walked among us as a man. This naturally makes the form of a man into a sacred form, but it also gives the human form something higher to aspire to, since the divine God-man was also above man, and that God aspect also should be emulated. This leads to the very specific idea of our humanity needing to be preserved due to God's favoritism of this form, but also uplifted as the best possible version of this form, since that's why God walked among us in the first place, to purify and ascend man into more than what we are now. Therefore, changing humanity into post-humanity becomes blasphemy, but letting humanity to remain in its current weak and lowly form is also blasphemy, by being against the divine plan of human ascension. Worshipping a deity that became man means that humanity emulates a deity that emulated man, leading to a nice little cycle of mutual love between man and deity. God emulates us and we emulate God, and there's a nice give and take there, making God a father of humanity that shares our condition and not a distant force. The Astartes then become the physical manifestation of this by having bits of the Emperor's DNA flowing through them, which is why they tend to see normal humans as weak. Not because they're transhuman freaks who belittle the concept of humanity like the Mechanicus, but because they're closer to the ultimate form of man, the Emperor himself. Even though much of the Astartes don't ascribe to the Imperial cult, they still adhere to the seeds of the Imperial Creed, present in the tenets of the humanist Imperial Truth, which was the actual philosophy preached by the Emperor before it was proven insufficient for human civilization, making the events in 40K be the opposite of what happened in our real-world history, where humanist philosophy emerged from the seeds of thought in Catholicism. In the grim darkness of the far future, space Catholicism emerges from space humanism taught to us by a space wizard. And yeah, although we all know the Imperium of Man is dripping in Catholic motif and aesthetics, as well as its hierarchical structure is basically the same, it's not all superficial. There's also deeper similarities in philosophical ideas of beauty and the place of mankind in the universe. The Chaos Gods are not human and are very different from the human form, so naturally their worshippers have their bodies twisted in new mutations, which is a sign of them emulating the abominations they serve, ugliness often being a result of sin, as it were. That's why Sanguinius is a mutant who's tolerated, because he's pretty. Ooh. I'm not actually joking. Beauty is seen as a manifestation of truth in metaphysical terms, but also genetic health in biological terms. So a beautiful mutation is not seen as a transgression against humanity. While the Ogrins, they're not beautiful, but they are strong, and strength has a similar connotation to beauty in this regard. If it's useful, then it's more accepted. But also, they're not that different from humans either. Like, you can see the human resemblance, so. Anyway, the Space Marines, being the defenders of mankind in the philosophical and religious context that they're from, therefore make sense even if they're not baseline normal humans. because this is a reality where ideas and concepts are a real tangible thing in the immaterium, better known as the warp. Plato's philosophy is kind of on the money in this universe, where ideas and mental forms gain sentience in the warp, and anything that is believed or conceived by the human mind lives forever in the eternal immaterial reality that transcends time. This means that the ideals, like the idealized man, has a real presence in the real eternal realm that humanity draws knowledge from. This is important because even if the Platonic world of forms in 40K is a twisted storm of mental abuse, this still implies that everything else that follows from Plato's philosophy is also real, like, say, essentialism, the belief that everything has an essence that is immutable and eternal. And yeah, the warp is basically Platonic philosophy on some serious crack, because not only does the essence of things exist in another reality, but the human mind can actually shape and order the material world, according to Plotinus, who was a famous Neoplatonist. And this element of Platonic philosophy would explain the Psychers, or the Cockney boys. This means that the Emperor's ascension as a warp entity serves as the eternal presence of the concept of man himself as an eternal idea in the immaterium. Therefore, modifying humans to better resemble the idealized form of man is not a violation of humanity, but its fulfillment. Shaping material humanity to better resemble the essence of humanity in another reality that transcends time. And this is reminiscent of medieval philosophy, which was heavily influenced by Platonism, and was obsessed with the problem of universals and essences, which explains why humanity inevitably evolved into a galactic medieval society, with the Astartes just being space knights, with their symbolic heraldry and traditions, all being an attempt to emulate the ideal form of the warrior. The values of a society determine the choices it will make, but the underlying reality it inhabits determine which values will prove to be most effective and thus triumph. The reason why Space Marines aren't transhuman is because they are effectively backed by an essentialist philosophy. The idea that the identity of an object or being is defined by its inherent characteristics. While nominalism is the idea that abstract concepts are mere social constructs we made up to define things for the convenience of language, and a human is whatever we say it is. This idea won out in our world. But it would be total BS when the abstract concept of lust is sentient and wants to molest you, and I mean you specifically. Unlike what its detractors say, essentialism isn't based on arbitrary human language but on binary logic. Essentialism is the idea that something either is or is not something, and this is or is not human in this case, which means that essentialism is based on the fabric of a typical form of logical thought, and definitions are based on objective attributes. This is why essentialism will never go away. However, there are limitations to it, of course. If a kid is born with webbed feet, does a Space Marine go, "I'm sorry, Timmy, you ugly cunt"? The problem is that we will never get rid of essentialism or the objections to it, because even those who reject essentialism wholesale reject it as being not correct, which implies that it fails to have the attributes of correct thinking, which implies there's a set of things correct thinking must have to be correct, which implies essence. I'm not saying everyone secretly believes in essentialism, but I think there is an inescapable essentialist tendency in the human thought process. But what gets especially confusing is when two different forms of essentialism conflict with each other. Racial essentialism, for instance, tends to dehumanize some races at the expense of others, precisely by affirming greater value on some racial attributes over others, while human essentialism tends to focus on the unifying aspects of humanity as the essence that matters, which is at the core of the Space Marine concept, not only in 40K, but in sci-fi in general, because Heinlein, who basically created the concept as we know it in Starship Troopers, which inspired 40K, said this about human essentialism. "I believe in my whole race, yellow, white, black, red, brown, in the honesty, courage, intelligence, durability, and the goodness of the overwhelming majority of my brothers and sisters, everywhere on this planet. I am proud to be a human being. I believe that we have come this far by the skin of our teeth, that we always make it just by the skin of our teeth, but that we will always make it, survive, endure. I believe that this hairless embryo with the aching, oversized brain case and the opposable thumb, this animal barely up from the apes, will endure longer than his home planet, will spread out to the stars and beyond. carrying with him his honesty and his insatiable curiosity, his unlimited courage, and his noble essential decency. This I believe. Robert A. Heinlein. This sounds like something an Imperial iterator would say, doesn't it? Meanwhile, transhumanism blurs the line between humanity and the post-human, usually artificial intelligence. But it's not because technological takeover of the human brain is inevitable, and that cyborgs are more efficient, etc., and progress is unstoppable, and always better, etc. That's actually not true. Technological progress can mess with things we don't understand, which might destroy humanity, like the Maya starving to death after limestone construction ruined agricultural soil, or in 40K when civilization collapsed in the dark age of technology precisely because of unbridled, poorly thought out technological progress as humanity messed with things it didn't understand, and AI ruined everything. You think that couldn't happen in the real world? Did you know that Sam Altman, the dude who created ChatGPT, is a prepper? With gold and guns and some farmland beyond the rainbow he can fly to if everything goes to crap. Why? Maybe because he knows something you don't. Be careful with techno fetish. Tech often just makes things more expensive, and factions with less tech often win against sophisticated empires. That's why a few dudes with AKs beat the US military in Afghanistan, because camping with the bros with sandals and simple guns in the mountains for 20 years was far cheaper and therefore more efficient than the massive American military infrastructure.
The United States as well being defeated in Afghanistan by 90% illiterate goat herders with no external support really. Now, when the Mujahideen were fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan, the U.S. was giving $1 billion in lethal aid in 1985 dollars. Nothing like that. Nobody ever gave them that kind of support. But yet we were defeated. All the techno-wizardry of the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Marine Corps, great fighting men and women, great capability, all that equipment with bad, weak leadership, with weak political leadership, and we got our butts kicked. And it's what an embarrassment.
Also, the Mongol horse nomads with bows and arrows beat the Chinese who had gunpowder and extremely sophisticated engineering and walls. And the nomadic tribal Arabs just exploded from their peninsula and conquered massive bits of the former Roman Empire, because using camels to carry troops and supplies was more maneuverable and cheaper to maintain than highly complex road systems. The Spanish and the Brits conquering vast swaths of lands via technological supremacy is not the only method of conquest throughout history. Technological development is essential to give an edge, but it's not enough on its own. Don't underestimate the power of the human spirit, and tradition is a way to discipline the human spirit over time, as well as give it an extremely powerful and time-tested spiritual purpose, which is why the Space Marines in 40K are defined by their traditions just as much as their technology. Those who realize the power of traditions sometimes call it a kind of social technology, but it's best not to see everything in technological terms. Tradition is a lot more like life itself, where certain genes are passed down over the generations, and only the fit ones last a long time. It's why the Amish are doubling themselves, while the highly technological societies around them literally cannot reproduce. They're below replacement level. So you need to be very careful when challenging traditions. Even if some traditions should be challenged, you should be smart about how you do it. The transhumanists of today think they'll always triumph via tech alone, but the smartphone and the internet are destroying entire family lineages, as will AI girlfriends soon, by destroying traditional ways men and women used to meet, making industrial society as devastating to the human population as the Black Death. Rich guys use family traditions and strict rules for regulating the technology they create to keep their kids from being Zoomer autist coomers who jerk off to digital OnlyFans so they can have healthy brains and spread their genes, while they want you to be a perpetually online retard consumer who simps for the AI chick they're creating now. If transhumanists keep ignoring the importance of the human spirit and tradition, once they finally create their new cyborg man with his brain connected to the internet, he won't be a super Chad conquering the stars, but a loser sitting on the corner all day having sissy hypno fetish porn streaming directly into his skull until he dies. And transhumanism is not fueled by actual scientific thinking, it's derived by a misreading of human history, a misunderstanding of the human condition, and it's mostly fueled by postmodernism and silly academics in the humanities, and even if it has a couple of seasoned scientists in the group, it's not a real scientific doctrine.
Post human era, I don't think we're there yet. I think that has been subscribed to us by the academics and postmodernism. And I think they reached out for the post-humanist era because they had no sensibility within academics and in the mainstream about technology and the advances in artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, nanomedicine, nanotechnology, CRISPR, like with genetic engineering or gene therapy, et cetera, at all. So I think there was this leap. I think we're in the transhuman era, where the transhumanist era is about a human in transition to becoming something other. Now, what is that other? That could be an evolved human. It could be a human merging with artificial intelligence. It could be a human that, in my view, would become more humane.
Check out the Cyborg Manifesto by Donna Haraway, as well as Post-Human Feminist Theory. It's explicitly anti-humanist and sees the human biological condition as oppressive, that has to be deconstructed, which means destroyed. This is just more socialist autism, and it's why we need our own Space Marine autism to combat such filthy heretics. Secular humanists and the religious should probably join forces because these anti-human chaos gene stealer cults are coming for us all. Here's a question. Should those who wish to destroy humanity have human rights? Could be argued that humanity has a right to defend itself. Innocence proves nothing. But I'm joking. That might not be necessary. Odds are transhumanists will just destroy themselves or be incapable of competitive reproduction. Transhumanism will only succeed as a relevant force if it becomes just another religious tradition, but one that is anti-human, where they aspire to the purity of the blessed machine. Sound familiar? But if they do this, they'll ironically still be very human in many essential ways. Because religion and tradition are essentially human, making them just a contradiction of humans who hate their humanity and can't escape human nature. Because the ones that fight nature will probably just die out, or be outcompeted by what's proven to work through evolution. Because those transhumanists will spend too much time and resources trying to override human evolution, while those who work with the current of nature and build upon it with tech will just kick their asses. Which is why I'm more sympathetic to the Magos Biologis of the Genitors subsect of the Mechanicus, the tech priests who don't hate biology, but actually see it as a manifestation of the divine. Which makes sense because they're the ones responsible for curating gene seeds and biotechnology responsible in making the Astartes we know and love. And there's a philosophical and theological conflict within the religious hierarchy of the Magos Biologis. Those who believe in the primus humanum and Vogelism. The first doctrine states the divine purity of the human form as the god-emperor's form and therefore the ideal form for an intelligent being, while Vogelists believe in improving the human form through genetic science in order for humans to defend themselves for the troubles ahead, which is seen as controversial among the ecclesiastical hierarchy. There's actually a similar discussion happening in the Catholic Church over the last few decades. Notions of improving humans biologically through genetic science is seen as blasphemy by many. But it doesn't necessarily have to be seen as such. If the Bible says that humans used to be stronger with longer lifespans and never got tired or sick, much like how the Astartes are described, then our currently sickly and short-lived existence is the result of sin, which means that we are not how God created us in our current form, which means improving our biological condition might not be an affront to God, and we might not be glorifying God by preserving our current degenerated state. Also, the resurrection of Christ as the God-man into a glorified body was done for human ascension, and our bodies are meant to be transformed into glorified bodies of light by divine intervention anyway, because God himself finds our current form unsatisfactory for his plan on what we should become, because he wants us to be more like him. So I don't see how some improvements we do ourselves right now will spoil that divine plan. And I bring this up because a similar theological and civilizational context surrounds the Astartes and the Genitors who make them. Since in 40K, mankind fell from its age of technological knowledge and is in a state of degeneration, and the Imperial Creed states that the God Emperor has a path for humanity's ascension. The Space Marine is in that context of empowering the human essence. The muscle-bound hunk of the Space Marine is in that context of empowering the human essence and paying homage to mankind's former glory, in addition to protecting its survival by making humans able to fight inhuman enemies, like aliens or psychic Charles Manson. The Space Marine isn't truly transhumanist because he's not a transition into something post-human. He's a glorification of humanity. He's a super jacked, enhanced human meant to defend humanity, which is completely different. It's more that he's hyperhuman, which means human, but more. Just look at this beefcake! You may not like it, but that's what peak male performance looks like. It was a friend of mine who first coined the term hyperhuman to me. And if you're watching this, valeu amigo. So you know how a trans person has surgery to change their genitals in an attempt to transition into another gender? Well, a hyperman would have surgery to add a third testicle, to be even more of a man's man. The Space Marine is meant to be the pinnacle of humanity, not a means to overcome it. So that's what I mean when I say that a Space Marine is a hyperhuman. Unlike the Mechanicus, who wish to be more machine than man. The Space Marine might have his body integrated with his power armor and have his nervous system fused with an artificial intelligence, but he's still a biological human. The mechanical technology just revolves around his human form and serves him as the master. I get more into the relationship of man and machine in my video on super soldiers. I'll leave the link in the description. And the way the Space Marine is made is very organic, with historical precedents, steeped in tradition, and a warrior ethos reminiscent of warriors from ancient times like the Spartans. They're not mass-produced factory products to be bought and sold like the clones in Star Wars who have chips in their brains that prevent individual thinking. They are humans, born the old-fashioned way, when a man loves a woman, and are initiated into monastic warrior orders filled with rituals and a way of life that just happens to involve getting in an extra organ or erectile dysfunction. Remember, the essence is defined by attributes, and they're not removing or adding too many attributes when making the Space Marines, so they don't alter the human form completely. They're simply enhancing the attributes already there. Making human bones stronger is not making the bones less human. Making our saliva better at breaking down matter for digestion, which happens to give the Space Marines crazy acid spit, is just increasing the level of badassery already present in the human form. But all of this, I suppose, depends on how you define the human essence, and what attributes makes one human. One could argue that our weaknesses and imperfections are what make us human, and thus such enhancements would be an anti-human practice. But what if we humans are not defined by our weaknesses? What if we are defined by our strengths? In that case, getting rid of our weaknesses is not getting rid of our humanity. Much to the contrary. In both real-world Catholicism and the theology in Warhammer 40k inspired by it, the human essence is defined by a divine master of mankind. Who are we to decide what's a weakness? Also, seeking power or changing our perfectly healthy bodies can be seen as vanity or pride. Shouldn't we accept how God made us? However, in Catholicism, human weakness is derived from sin, so maybe our current state is technically a mockery of God's work. It's also arbitrary because we're in a constant state of deterioration. If we improve human eyesight, are we playing God or returning to how we used to be when myopia was less common? Our condition as humans isn't static, but fluid. And you might be asking me, Pilgrim, I would love to be a 3-meter tall, muscle-bound Giga Chad in power armor just as much as the next guy. But where do you draw the line? And yeah, that's an important question. If these modifications are allowed, then why not cat ears? Or a duck's giant corkscrew pee-pee? And I thought about this for a while, and my answer is, we don't draw a line. We draw 2 lines, but not one arbitrary horizontal line above the current human state, and we just don't allow any improvement beyond that. But we draw 2 vertical lines on either side of the human essence that allows humans to ascend to greater heights while constraining us to our humanity and not moving laterally into another form. Hopefully I'm making sense with this metaphor. In Catholicism, like in Warhammer, the debate is somewhat ongoing. The Catholic position is that genetic modification is not only okay, but desirable if for medical reasons to cure genetic diseases as gene therapy. When it comes to genetic enhancement though, that's tricky. According to Dr. Marilyn E. Coors, Pope St. John Paul II, back in the 80s, already understood the gray area between genetic enhancement and therapy, where it's sometimes difficult to distinguish between them, so he approves genetic enhancement provided it's aimed at improving the human biological condition and is not done on embryos and doesn't violate the person's dignity and common biological nature. Which means no Gattaca-style designer babies, human cloning, and baby factories that turn humans into consumer products who are an extension of technology instead of technology being an extension of humans. I'm sorry, Timmy, you're not the 6-foot-tall Hyperbarian Ubermensch I ordered, so I'm taking you back to the factory, you damn cunt. I just gave up having a Australian accent. That's some Emperor of Mankind level bad parenting right there. But in 2008, Pope Benedict XVI was worried about how genetic enhancement is too easily abused, so he released Dignitas Persona, which is more clearly against genetic enhancement, but still completely in favor of gene therapy as medicine and in favor of genetic science as a whole, if practiced ethically. But the fear of playing God is not the biggest reason of concern here, and that's overplayed by critics who think religion doesn't allow for any use of tech because we believe a lightning bolt will hit the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. Pope Benedict said that genetic sciences are great for mankind to participate in God's creation as stewards of nature, and bioengineering plants and animals for food production is quite welcome. The concern is for us not to disfigure the human essence. And merging science with tradition, like with the Space Marines as a theoretical example, is a good way to do this, if you think about it. By having the Astartes all be young teens, born as normal humans, who then become celibate warrior monks incapable of reproducing, solves many problems like the eugenics issue, and the caste system issue. And this basically uses science to return to old medieval traditions of young men entering these monastic orders, and has the explicit purpose of defending humanity. So it's ethically okay if done voluntarily and not as extreme as it is in 40K, because I know that in many cases it can get really extreme in how Space Marines are recruited. But if we just avoid some of that crazy grimdark BS and just keep it, you guys know what I mean, hopefully. Now it's important to note that the debate in the church isn't settled yet, but I appreciate both popes immensely, and I defer to whatever the magisterium decides. My interest in human biological improvement is primarily focused on the defense of humanity itself, not crazy ideological notions, as is criticized by Dignitas Personae. If we face great challenges in the future, improving our warriors might be key. The success of entire civilizations have historically hinged on the quality of its fighters in the past, so 40K, as ridiculous as it is, has a poignant point about that. But I fully understand that trying to change humanity's biological essence for ideological purposes, like post-human feminism or whatever, is extremely malignant, and we should just learn to accept our human condition and not allow our ideologies to potentially destroy us. Which is why I was quite surprised when Yuval Harari, of all people, when he was interviewed by Lex Friedman, had some good points similar to Pope Benedict's concerns.
I think it's an extremely dangerous development, and the chances that this will go wrong, that people will use the new technologies trying to upgrade humans, but actually downgrading them, this is a very, very big danger. If you let corporations and armies and ruthless politicians change humans using tools like AI and bioengineering, it's very likely that they will try to enhance a few human qualities that they need, like intelligence and discipline, while neglecting what are potentially more important human qualities, like compassion, like autistic sensitivity, like spirituality. If you give Putin, for instance, bioengineering and AI and brain-computer interfaces, he's likely to want to create a race of super soldiers who are much more intelligent and much more stronger and also much more disciplined and never rebel and march on Moscow against him. But he has no interest in making them more compassionate or more spiritual. So the end result could be a new type of humans, a downgraded humans, who are highly intelligent and disciplined, but have no compassion and no spiritual depth.
But the set of dystopias that we could arrive at through this, through allowing corporations to modify humans, is vast, and we should be worried about that. So it seems like humans are pretty good as we are. All the flaws, all of it together.
We are better than anything that we can intentionally design at present.
Yeah.
Like any intentionally designed humans at the present moment is going to be much, much worse than us, because basically we don't understand ourselves. I mean, as long as we don't understand our brain, our body, our mind, it's a very, very bad idea to start manipulating a system that you don't understand deeply, and we don't understand ourselves.
I must admit, this clip shocked me, because I disagree with Yuval Harari on almost everything, and he kinda creeps me out a little bit. But it was humbling to be cautioned on the dangers of this technology from someone so different in mindset. And it was nice to be reminded how most of us can agree that humanity is good and should be defended. But when it comes to the future, I think history will reward whoever finds the perfect balance between tech and tradition. Like I said, it's better to work in unity with human evolution and build upon it instead of trying to rewrite it or become something else, which is why the Magos Biologists are the only ones in the Adeptus Mechanicus with any brain cells. Literally, because the other retards replaced theirs with a CPU running on a space potato! Even though transhumanism is a dangerous and silly idea based on incoherent postmodernism that deconstructed all definitions including that of humanity itself, the creation of juiced-up human warriors within the bounds of pro-human traditions to defend humanity could be an overall positive thing and necessary depending on the circumstances. And anti-human types that want a post-human era should not be allowed to monopolize the discussion on the improvement of the human condition. That would be equally dangerous. We need to outcompete them through the perfect balance of technology and tradition. Tradition being the perpetuation of ideas and customs through the ages, including the idea of humanity itself, preserved through essentialism, means that humanity is tradition, because genes work the same way and these ideas defend the integrity of the human genome. And innovation is part of the human essence, and we must continue to innovate within the sensible bounds of the human tradition that keeps the fire alive. It's not about stifling progress, but making progress itself a tradition in service of mankind, and not sacrifice mankind for progress. Which is why I think transhumanism will probably destroy itself. Tampering too much with the human essence and condition will threaten to remove the human need or desire to keep innovating. It's because of the limits and nature of our bodies and minds that we developed tools in the first place. If you break down some of those limits, the incentive to keep innovating will eventually decrease. Which means future transhuman societies will probably stagnate in their future utopia metaverses they uploaded themselves into until a meteor eventually crashes into the servers, and then they all just disappear. Techno-fetish is just as bad as technophobia. This is why the key is a balance between technology and tradition, which creates the most powerful competitive societies in history. The Portuguese and the Spanish were at the cutting edge of technological innovations in Europe, and became the first superpowers in human history, while being highly traditional and rejecting the progressive ideas of the Renaissance happening in the rest of Europe, and they set up inquisitions instead, because they were still functioning on a medieval mentality as they spread out throughout the world, and they were more powerful than the progressive Italians who preferred to draw naked people instead. That's why nobody speaks Italian these days, and it's dying out as a language, while everybody speaks Spanish. That's Darwinism, kids. The Portuguese in particular, with their firm grasp on tradition and new technology, were able to outcompete larger empires of comparable technological prowess, but less devout in their own beliefs, like how just 1,000 Portuguese dudes took over Malacca by themselves. Portuguese history is full of surprising and epic moments like that. Victorian England was also a highly traditional society with technological innovation that the world had never seen before. And in the Cold War, the USA returned to its Christian roots and clung to their traditions and put God on the dollar and the Pledge of Allegiance, and defeated the Soviet Union, who were actually more obsessed with social progressivism and changing how society functioned and stuff like that. The Soviets were already transhumanists, by the way. Stalin wanted to make human-chimpanzee hybrids as an underclass. Slavoj Žižek actually gets into this. And Soviets treated orphanages as factories, which was a disaster that led to the deaths of thousands of children. Applying cold science to human society utterly failed with the Soviets. At the same time, though, being too traditional holds you back from adapting to a harsh Darwinian universe. There's no point in praising the Amish for making babies they can't defend. They are completely reliant on Uncle Sam for that. So if things went all fallout in the USA, with Liberty Prime roaming the desert looking for commies, the Amish would get slaughtered by super mutants in the wasteland. That's why the Brotherhood of Steel are the best faction in Fallout. Techno knights who live by medieval traditions and protect the human essence from harmful technology, while developing and safeguarding good technology that empowers humans for the future. They're definitely the good guys. Fight me, bros!
Because they're ridiculous. Because they gallivant around the Mojave, pretending to be knights of yore.
Shut your mouth, Mr. House. Anyway, I'm still thinking about all this. What do you guys think? Do I tread dangerously close to heresy by defending some physical modifications? Or do I not go far enough and we should all make love to our toasters? I really do want to hear your opinions down below. But one good way to use technology is to download and play Raid Shadow Legends on your mobile. Play on your downtime. Don't forget to click the link or scan my QR code if you're interested. And you'll get new side champions and bonuses, and it's gonna be awesome! Remember to use the promo JT skin before October 7th. JonTron is counting on you, my friends. And you'll make Talia smile. And thank you, my patrons! Your continued support is not only appreciated, but greatly valued, and you have my gratitude. And thank you all for listening to my ramblings. Have a good day, my friends.